Hello, folks, and welcome back to a hurricane short summary. Looking over the seconds of the notables that I wanted to make an individual video of, this is 1983's Hurricane Tico. Again, I talked about Tico in the 83 season video that I made, and if you watched it, great. If you didn't watch it, that's perfectly fine. And we are just going to roll right into Tico. No further introductions needed. Interesting note before we get into nearly anything regarding its development as a tropical system, Tico started off as a wave around Costa Rica on October 7th to the 8th, approximately. So Tico started off in the Atlantic. However, this does not mean that Tico is an Atlantic to Pacific crossover, as to qualify as a crossover, you need to be an actual tropical system. So a depression, a storm, a hurricane, a major hurricane doesn't matter. Just not a tropical disturbance or just a wave, as it doesn't count. So Tico doesn't count here. Its entire life essentially happening in the Eastern Pacific, aside from Costa Rica, or aside from originating near Costa Rica, I should say. Tico becomes TD21, Tropical Depression 21, on the 11th of October, a fair bit away from the Gulf of Tetuanapek. I think it's that little indent there. Needless information that I stored in my brain. Now, Tico turns to the north, so being brought inwards due to a strong low pressure around the middle of Mexico. I explained with Octave that low pressure on low pressure action, or just pressure actions, high pressures and low pressures act opposite to magnets. A low and a low tend to draw each other together. A low and a high tend to repel. So the opposite of magnets here, think of it like that. And so we see at this time frame, Tico also was upgraded to a tropical storm. This happening on the 13th, and Tico was upgraded to a hurricane on the 14th. At this point, though, on the 13th, the eye of Tico was open, so not fully enclosed by an eye wall or anything, and was 22 kilometers wide. Why am I bringing up this information? This is it's interesting to see how we already see Tico being pretty well put together at this point. This is something that you don't normally see with tropical storms, is a even remotely close to an eye, just at least a center of circulation. But we do see an eye pretty early on in Tico's life, which is interesting. So moving onwards, a strengthening high pressure that replaced the low pressure that was in Mexico. So a high pressure now in Mexico at this point is strengthening and pushes Tico out to sea to the northwest and then west. Tico becomes a major hurricane on the 16th of October, peaking the 19th at wind speeds of 130 to 135 miles per hour. Made landfall near Mazatlan at 125 miles per hour the same day, and according to this track here, dissipated on that day too, which is not entirely correct. Tico was last able to be observed on October 24th near Ohio, which is where, at least for my purposes, where Tico's track would finally end, not here just after entering Mexico. So there's that. So Tico being a pretty strong storm upon entering Mexico. However, we wouldn't see the largest amount of rain in Mexico, which is odd, but or maybe not, depends. Tico would cause the deaths of 141 individuals, 135 of which happening in Mexico, and $284 million in damage. In Mexico, many blatantly, completely ignored warnings. This is because, for the most part, major hurricanes do not make landfall in Mexico. Many storms in general that form in the East Pacific do not turn back east into Mexico, and even if they do, they're not that strong, which Tico was not. Tico was strong. Tico is responsible for sinking 9 small ships and running 2 100-meter long anchored ships aground, causing Mazatlan as well as 22 other cities to become powerless, however, thankfully for only a day, and it downed many bridges in Durango. Tico is responsible for destroying 19,000 acres of bean and corn in the Sinaloa region, and in the United States, floodwaters in Oklahoma City reached apparently 7 feet deep. $84 million in damage was seen just in Oklahoma alone, which is insane. That's a large chunk of the dollar in damage amount by Tico. The states of this is a lot here: Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia all saw rainfall of around 3 to 7 inches in varying parts of the states from Tico's remnants before we do see the track here in yellow before Tico finally dissipating in Ohio. That is an insanely wide swath of rainfall and a pretty long life as well. Straight up, Tico is the worst storm of the 1983 season. Uh, definitely in terms of wind speed, not in terms of dollars in damage though. Surprisingly, that would actually go to Octave, which I have made a video on. Tico is tied for 7th with the worst winds upon landfall in the East Pacific Basin. They may be saying, what do you mean it's tied for 7th? There's one first place, that is Patricia of 2015. There are 2 storms tied for seconds, so we're at a second and third now. There are 3 storms tied for 4th, so we're at a 4th, 5th, and 6th now. And then 4 other storms tied for 7th, so there's a 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. So there's a whole bunch of storms that have done this with heavy winds upon landfall, but certainly not to the extent as, say, the Atlantic, though. In fact, Tico is one of only 4 storms to ever strike Mazatlan, or at least very close to Mazatlan. For the record, I hope I've been pronouncing that correctly, as a major hurricane. So, very, very rare. And that, folks, is all that I have for Tico. A very, very powerful storm that, again, a special storm upon landfall in Mexico. I hope that you all learned something from this video, the same as I did while researching Tico. Now, I'll see you in the next one, and I appreciate all of you for watching.